There is a deep strength in silence that most people never discover because they are too preoccupied with filling the air with noise. In a world where words dominate, where people speak quickly without reflecting, where opinions are exchanged like currency, presence often gets lost. Yet presence is not something you can fake, and it is not something you can acquire by simply choosing eloquent expressions. Presence is cultivated from within, and it has the ability to communicate far beyond what words are capable of. Think about the moments when you sit with someone who does not need to speak, yet you feel the weight of their being. Their calmness, their attentiveness, their quiet awareness radiates into the space. Without explanation, they embody an energy that communicates sincerity, patience, and steadiness. This is the essence of presence, and it speaks in ways words cannot. Words can mislead, twist, and confuse. Presence cannot. It reveals itself in posture, in breathing, in the focus of the eyes, in the groundedness of the body. You can speak of peace all day, but if your body is restless, if your eyes are unsettled, if your spirit is disturbed, the words fall apart. In the same way, you can remain quiet, saying nothing at all, yet the energy you carry radiates peace and steadiness, and this silence becomes louder than any speech. Presence is power, because it is not about what you do in a single moment, but about what you have cultivated consistently over time. The body remembers every habit. The mind reflects every pattern. Presence comes from discipline, from training, from aligning your thoughts, breath, and actions into harmony. It cannot be borrowed, and it cannot be worn like a mask. It is either there or it is not. And when it is there, it transforms every space you step into. Imagine entering a room where two people are arguing. Their voices may dominate, but when someone with true presence walks in, the energy shifts immediately. No words are needed. The argument may not stop instantly, but the atmosphere changes. This is because presence is a form of communication that goes beyond language. It operates in subtle vibrations, in the rhythm of breathing, in the steadiness of stillness. It carries more truth than endless streams of explanation. Many believe that to influence others, they must speak more, convince more, and explain more. Yet true influence rarely lies in words. The greatest teachers throughout history did not always speak the most, but they embodied the teachings in their very being. They carried their practice not in speeches, but in how they walked, how they breathed, how they faced challenges, how they endured silence. Their presence itself was the message. To develop presence, you must first learn to be with yourself without distraction. Sit in silence without reaching for your phone, without filling the gap with entertainment, without searching for escape. Silence is uncomfortable at first because it reveals the turbulence of the mind. You begin to hear your own thoughts more clearly, and they often arrive with restlessness, with doubt, with noise. But the longer you sit, the more the mind begins to settle, and the silence becomes less threatening. Over time, the silence turns into a source of power. This inner silence is where presence is forged. When you are no longer restless with yourself, when you can sit with your own being without anxiety, then you begin to carry that steadiness into the world. In conversation, you are no longer desperate to fill every pause with words. In meetings, you no longer need to prove yourself by speaking the loudest. In relationships, you no longer chase validation through constant explanation. Instead, your silence becomes full. It holds weight, it speaks through calmness, and it resonates with those around you. Presence also requires honesty. You cannot cultivate presence if you live in contradiction. If your actions do not align with your values, if your words do not align with your thoughts, if your private life does not align with your public image, presence will not grow. The body carries contradiction like tension. The mind carries it like heaviness, and others can sense it even if they do not name it. True presence is born from alignment. When thought, word, and action flow in harmony, presence naturally expands. There is also discipline in presence. It does not mean passively sitting still, detached from the world. It means being so rooted in awareness that your stillness itself becomes active. You can stand, walk, train, work, or rest, and still presence follows you. It is in the way you lift an object, the way you place your steps, the way you breathe in stressful situations. Presence is carried into everything because it is not a performance. It is an integration of body, mind, and spirit. Words will always have their place, but without presence, they remain empty. With presence, even few words carry depth. A single sentence spoken from a place of truth is worth more than endless speeches spoken without alignment. Silence filled with presence carries more weight than the most eloquent speech spoken without authenticity. When people look back on the moments that moved them most, they often cannot recall every word spoken. What they remember is how they felt, what energy they received, what presence they experienced. Words fade, presence remains. This is why cultivating presence becomes the true path to influence, connection, and transformation. Vulnerability is often misunderstood. Many view it as weakness, as the act of opening oneself up to harm, rejection, or judgment. But in truth, vulnerability is not fragility. It is an inner strength that is born when one decides to live without the burden of fear. Fear attaches itself to the mind, whispering stories of failure, betrayal, and shame. It convinces us that to be open is to be exposed, and to be exposed is to risk pain. Yet, when fear dissolves, vulnerability no longer appears as something threatening. It becomes a profound source of connection, authenticity, and inner power. To understand vulnerability without fear, one must first explore the relationship between control and trust. Fear often arises from the desire to control outcomes. The mind clings tightly to expectations, trying to ensure certainty where none exists. But life cannot be controlled in its entirety. Relationships, experiences, and even one's own emotions move beyond rigid boundaries. Vulnerability becomes powerful when one releases the obsession with controlling every outcome. To live vulnerably is to step into the unknown with trust, to allow experiences to unfold without resistance, and to meet them with openness rather than defensive barriers. When a person practices vulnerability without fear, communication transforms. Words no longer serve as masks to hide insecurity, but as bridges that connect deeply with others. Honesty flows without the weight of calculation. Instead of speaking to impress or to protect, one speaks to express. In this state, relationships shift from superficial exchanges to authentic encounters. Vulnerability in conversation is not about oversharing or dramatizing. It is about being truthful, present, and unafraid of revealing what is real in the moment. When fear is absent, vulnerability no longer feels like exposure. It feels like freedom. The body, too, carries the imprints of fear. Muscles tighten, breath shortens, posture closes. These subtle movements form a shield, a physical manifestation of inner resistance. To embody vulnerability without fear is to relax the body into openness. Shoulders soften, breath deepens, and presence expands. The body itself becomes a vessel that communicates safety, receptivity, and strength. In many traditions, this openness of the body is seen as the foundation of energy flow. Energy locked away in tension is released, and with it, vitality returns. Vulnerability in this sense is not just psychological, it is also physical, a harmony between mind and body that reflects true courage. There is also a profound spiritual dimension to vulnerability without fear. To open oneself fully to life is to trust in something greater than the individual self. It is an acknowledgement that one does not need to build walls to protect what is already infinite within. Fear builds separation between self and others, between self and life itself. Vulnerability removes those walls, allowing the individual to merge with the vastness of experience. In stillness, vulnerability without fear feels like standing at the edge of an ocean and realizing that the waves are not a threat but an invitation. To trust in that ocean, to allow oneself to be carried by its rhythm, is to embrace life in its entirety. Fear often disguises itself as caution, strategy, or strength. It urges one to withhold emotions, to keep silent when words are needed, to withdraw when presence is required. But this type of guardedness is draining. It consumes energy in the constant effort of maintaining control and distance. Vulnerability without fear requires no such effort. It is effortless openness, a state where the energy once used for defense is instead redirected towards creativity, connection, and growth. When the armor falls, the energy locked inside that armor is freed. This freedom allows the individual not just to survive, but to thrive. In the practice of vulnerability without fear, there is also an acceptance of impermanence. To open oneself is to acknowledge that relationships, experiences, and even emotions may shift and dissolve. Fear clings because it seeks permanence. It wants certainty where none can be found. Vulnerability, on the other hand, flows with impermanence. It recognizes that change does not diminish authenticity. Instead, it deepens it. By being vulnerable in each moment, one fully lives within that moment without trying to secure what cannot be secured. This acceptance brings peace and resilience. for nothing needs to be forced and nothing needs to be resisted. It is important to understand that vulnerability without fear does not mean naivety. It does not mean exposing oneself recklessly or ignoring discernment. Rather, it is about openness balanced with wisdom. Fear makes the mind overprotective, seeing danger in every possibility. Vulnerability without fear tempers this reaction by allowing discernment to guide without closing the heart. To walk into the world with open eyes and an open heart is not weakness. It is mastery. It is the ability to embrace reality without shrinking away from it. The essence of vulnerability without fear is authenticity. To live authentically is to be aligned with one's true self, unburdened by masks or pretenses. Fear insists on masks, creating identities that fit into expectations or avoid criticism. Vulnerability discards these masks, for it recognizes that the truth of being needs no disguise. Authenticity radiates naturally when fear dissolves, and in this authenticity, others find trust, inspiration, and courage themselves. Vulnerability without fear is therefore not only personal, but also relational. It has the power to uplift and transform those around us. The journey towards vulnerability without fear is not a sudden leap, but a gradual practice. It requires moments of stillness, reflection, and the courage to lean into discomfort. Each time one chooses openness instead of withdrawal, each time one speaks truth instead of silence, each time one trusts instead of resists, the grip of fear loosens. Over time, this practice becomes a way of being, a natural state where openness and strength coexist effortlessly. Vulnerability, once feared, becomes the very source of resilience, connection, and transformation. Conflict is an inseparable part of human existence. Wherever there are people, there are differences in thought, opinion, desire, and intention. These differences create friction, and that friction, if not met with awareness, can turn into conflict. Many believe that strength in conflict is about responding quickly, speaking louder, or overpowering the other side. But true strength lies not in immediate reaction, but in the ability to remain still when the inner storm is rising. Patience is not passivity. Patience is the ability to withstand the waves of conflict without letting them drown your clarity. When conflict appears, the first impulse of the mind is to defend itself. Words form rapidly, emotions surge, and a deep urge to protect one's view rises. This is the moment where patience becomes the rarest and most powerful tool. To hold back does not mean to give in. To hold back means to give space. That space allows what is chaotic to slowly reveal its structure. Without patience, the fire of conflict consumes everything it touches. But with patience, the same fire becomes a source of light rather than destruction. Patience requires discipline. It is not natural to stay calm when one feels attacked. It is not natural to listen when one only wants to reply. The mind pushes toward confrontation, but the disciplined mind resists this push. This resistance is not weakness, it is mastery. By cultivating patience, one refuses to be controlled by the aggression of others or the heat of one's own emotions. In conflict, the patient person does not seek to win over another, but to win over themselves. Imagine two forces colliding. One pushes with anger, the other pushes with equal force. The result is escalation, both sides locked in endless struggle. Now imagine one side does not push back, but instead observes. The energy of conflict cannot find resistance to feed upon, and slowly it begins to dissolve. This is the quiet work of patience. It transforms the nature of the interaction by refusing to mirror hostility. It creates space where wisdom can emerge and solutions can be seen more clearly. Patience in conflict is not silence for the sake of avoiding confrontation. It is an active form of strength. It is the strength of waiting until the right words are clear, until emotions settle, and until perspective widens. To practice patience is to practice seeing beyond the immediate moment, to recognize that one heated exchange does not define the entirety of a relationship, nor does it capture the truth of the situation. With patience, one looks past the surface storm and notices the deeper currents moving beneath. Conflict often arises from misunderstanding. When people are quick to speak but slow to listen, misunderstanding multiplies. Patience opens the ear. Patience allows the mind to absorb the other side fully without the need to immediately filter everything through one's own perspective. This openness is rare, and because it is rare, it is powerful. It disarms the other side not with force, but with presence. The simple act of waiting before responding communicates that one is willing to understand, not merely to attack. In the midst of conflict, emotions want to dictate behavior. Anger demands expression, pride resists concession, fear fuels defense. To practice patience is to place a pause between emotion and action. That pause is where mastery lives. In that pause, one can choose differently. One can decide not to let the emotion be the master, but to let awareness guide the response. The more one practices this pause, the more unshakable one becomes, for no external conflict can disrupt the inner balance that has been cultivated. Patience also reveals the impermanence of conflict. What feels like a fire that will consume everything often burns out when it is not constantly fed. Anger has a lifespan, and so does frustration. When one learns to endure the peak of these emotions without reacting, one begins to see that conflict is not as permanent or overwhelming as it first appears. This realization changes the way conflict is approached in the future. It is no longer something to fear or to avoid, but a test of stability and inner strength. Patience in conflict is also an act of compassion. It acknowledges that others, too, are driven by their emotions and limitations. Instead of meeting their unawareness with equal unawareness, patience allows space for their energy to shift. By not escalating, one creates the possibility for the other to calm down, to see more clearly, to return to balance. This is not about controlling the other, but about controlling oneself so that the environment of conflict does not spiral into deeper division. Practicing patience does not mean one never responds. It means one responds from clarity, not from chaos. Words spoken from patience carry a different weight. They are not sharpened by anger, but grounded in understanding. They do not aim to wound, but to reveal. Actions taken with patience are not impulsive, but considered. Such actions are difficult to resist because they arise from steadiness, not volatility. The training of patience must begin before conflict arises. It is cultivated in everyday life, in waiting, in listening, in resisting the urge to immediately gratify every impulse. When one learns to be patient in small moments, one is prepared to be patient in great conflicts. The discipline of waiting in silence, of breathing before reacting, of observing instead of rushing forward, builds the foundation for strength when the real tests arrive. Conflict will always come, but how one meets it determines whether it becomes destruction or growth. The one who rushes into battle with words and emotions will always find themselves entangled in consequences they did not foresee. The one who holds back, who waits, who watches, discovers that conflict itself is not the enemy. The enemy is the lack of patience within. There exists a form of strength that does not need applause, a type of giving that does not seek acknowledgement, and a depth of sacrifice that never demands recognition. It is the quiet, unseen kind, the kind that shapes a person's spirit without the world ever noticing. True sacrifice is not displayed with banners nor spoken with pride. It is carried in silence, like a hidden flame that burns without drawing attention. When one sacrifices without announcement, there is a purity to the act, a refinement of intention, where the value is found not in how others perceive it, but in the transformation it brings to the one who offers it. So much of the world today has been conditioned to show, to display, and to seek validation. Every act of kindness, every struggle endured, and every challenge overcome often finds its way into the open space where recognition is sought. Yet, when sacrifice becomes a performance, it loses its essence. It no longer stems from the center of sincerity, but instead from the surface of self-image. The art of sacrifice without announcement is a discipline of the inner world where the heart gives without asking and the spirit endures without expectation. Sacrifice, in its truest form, is about relinquishing something valuable, something deeply held, for the sake of a greater cause or a higher principle. But to do this quietly, without anyone knowing, is to allow humility to lead the way. Humility does not need eyes watching, it requires only the strength of one's own conviction. It teaches that the greatest victories are often invisible, the strongest warriors are often unheard, and the deepest love is often unspoken. To sacrifice silently is to live in alignment with truth rather than with appearance. When you choose to give something up without seeking praise, the power of the act deepens. It is no longer about the world knowing what you endured, it is about you knowing that you are capable of stepping beyond your own attachment. That sacrifice becomes a mirror that reflects your inner strength back to you, teaching you that you are not bound by what you possess, nor are you confined by the comfort you surrender. Instead, you rise above it unshaken, unannounced, and unbroken. In silence, sacrifice takes on a new quality. It is no longer heavy, it becomes light. The absence of external recognition means there is nothing to carry outside yourself. No expectations, no disappointments, no comparisons. You simply give, you simply let go, and in doing so, you gain freedom. Freedom from the weight of needing others to see, freedom from the burden of proving yourself, freedom from the endless cycle of validation. This is where true power begins to grow, when you no longer need anyone to affirm the path you walk. The essence of sacrifice without announcement can be seen in nature. A tree does not announce when it sheds its leaves. It simply allows them to fall, knowing it is part of a greater rhythm. The river does not proclaim when it releases its water into the ocean. It simply flows, fulfilling its purpose without words. The sun does not declare its light each morning. It rises, silently offering warmth to the world. These forces of nature do not ask to be praised. They exist, they give, they transform, and they remain constant. In the same way, the human spirit finds its deepest strength when it learns to give and release in silence without needing to speak of it. But this path is not easy. To sacrifice without announcement requires letting go of the ego's hunger for recognition. The ego craves to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be validated. It wants to be rewarded for endurance, praised for effort, and admired for strength. Yet the true spirit knows that the greatest reward is not external, it is internal. The discipline of sacrifice without announcement trains the ego to bow to the spirit, to accept that the act itself is enough, and that fulfillment does not come from the outside world, but from the inner transformation. When one sacrifices quietly, something subtle begins to change within. Patience grows stronger, resilience deepens, and clarity expands. You begin to see that the act of sacrifice is not only about what is lost, but also about what is gained. By letting go, space is created. By enduring silently, endurance itself becomes your teacher. By stepping into sacrifice without anyone knowing, you learn that you are capable of living for something greater than yourself without ever needing to display it. This is strength in its purest form, unshaken by external eyes and untouched by external noise. The beauty of sacrifice without announcement is that it allows the act to remain sacred. It is not tainted by pride, not diminished by comparison, not diluted by the search for approval. It remains whole, pure, and untouched. In this way, sacrifice becomes less about the external act and more about the internal state. It becomes a meditation, practice, a way of shaping the inner being into something steadier, stronger, and freer. When you live in this manner, your life becomes anchored in authenticity. You are no longer acting to be seen, but acting because it is right. You are no longer enduring for applause, but enduring because it strengthens you. You are no longer giving to be thanked, but giving because giving itself is the reward. This shift brings peace because there is no longer a struggle between what you do and how others respond. There is only the act, silent and sacred, carried within you like a hidden flame. Protection is often understood in the most immediate and visible sense. It is the shield, the armor, the locked doors, the boundaries we place around ourselves to prevent intrusion or harm. This is the surface level understanding, and while it serves its purpose, it is only the first layer. True protection extends far beyond what can be seen or touched. It exists in the unseen spaces, in the realms of thought, energy, and spirit. To rely only on physical barriers is to overlook the vast and more subtle dimensions where our greatest vulnerabilities and strengths lie. The body can be guarded, but what about the mind that continuously absorbs impressions, images, and words from the world around it? Each day, countless thoughts enter without invitation. Many of them are not your own, but they settle inside, shaping moods, perspectives, and decisions. The noise of negativity, comparison, and doubt often finds its way into the inner space where physical locks and barriers are powerless. This is why protection must begin within, through awareness of what is allowed to penetrate the mind and what is consciously released before it takes root. The world is filled with energies, some uplifting and some draining. When walking into a crowded space, one can immediately feel the difference between environments that nourish and environments that consume. There are people whose presence radiates warmth and calm, and there are others who seem to pull the very air from the room. Physical distance is not always possible, yet energetic distance can be maintained. This form of protection requires no wall, no shield, but the steady cultivation of inner balance that prevents external energy from destabilizing the internal state. Protection beyond the physical is the mastery of resonance. Every being vibrates at a certain frequency determined by their thoughts, emotions, and actions. When your frequency is elevated through clarity, discipline, and alignment, lower vibrations cannot easily penetrate. Just as light makes darkness retreat, inner strength makes harmful energies dissipate. The more one learns to hold a higher state of awareness, the less vulnerable they are to the chaos surrounding them. Words, too, can wound in ways that physical force cannot. An insult can linger in the mind long after the sound has faded. A criticism can replay again and again, cutting deeper with each repetition. This is because the physical is not the only battlefield. The real struggle often unfolds in the realm of memory and imagination. Protection in this domain comes from recognizing that not every word deserves a place in your inner world. The ability to listen without absorbing, to hear without being pierced, is an essential form of defense that surpasses any physical guard. There is also the dimension of self-created harm. Many protect themselves fiercely from external threats while leaving themselves exposed to the silent attacks of their own mind. Doubts, fears, regrets, and self-criticism often strike harder than anything that comes from outside. A fortress may be built against others, yet the true invader often lies within. To protect beyond the physical is to cultivate a state of awareness where the mind no longer becomes an enemy, but a disciplined ally. This requires inner training, daily practice, and the courage to confront one's own patterns of thought. Traditions have long emphasized rituals, symbols, and practices meant to provide protection. While these hold meaning, their true power does not reside in the object itself, but in the energy and intention one carries. A symbol worn without inner awareness is merely decoration. But when the mind is steady, the spirit strong, and the energy aligned, even the simplest gesture becomes a shield. Thus, the deepest protection does not come from what is carried in the hand, but from what is carried in the heart and the clarity of the mind. When storms arise, physical protection may shelter the body from the rain, but it cannot prevent fear from spreading through the mind. Yet when the mind has been trained to remain unmoved, even in the face of uncertainty, no storm can truly harm. Inner resilience is the ultimate defense, for it cannot be broken by force or circumstance. It is cultivated through silence, discipline, and the continuous return to balance in the midst of distraction. Protection beyond the physical is also the wisdom of discernment. It is the ability to know what to engage with and what to release, which battles are worth fighting and which are illusions. Many are wounded not because they were struck, but because they chose to pick up weapons in wars that were never theirs to fight. To guard your energy is to understand that not every provocation deserves a response. Not every conflict requires your presence. In conserving this energy, you preserve your strength for what truly matters. The highest form of protection is presence itself. When fully present, the mind does not wander into imagined fears of the future or cling to unresolved pain of the past. Presence shields from the constant invasion of unnecessary thought. In this state, the external world loses its power to destabilize, for all attention rests in the moment, where clarity is strongest and awareness most alive. This is the invisible armor that cannot be pierced, the protection that transcends the limits of the physical. When we speak of growth, we often imagine a solitary journey, a path where one individual rises, struggles, and eventually transforms. But there exists another form of growth, one that is not walked alone, but shared with another. To grow together means to commit, not only to your own unfolding, but to hold space for the evolution of someone else as well. This kind of growth requires patience, awareness, and the humility to accept that true transformation never happens in isolation. The roots of trees intertwine beneath the soil, unseen but deeply connected, and in the same way, the roots of two lives can interlock in ways that strengthen both. Commitment to growth together is the conscious choice to not simply walk side by side, but to nurture the unfolding of two souls in harmony with one another. Growth together is not the absence of struggle. In fact, it is often through the friction of different perspectives, contrasting habits, and opposing ideas that growth deepens. Alone, a person may believe they are evolving simply because they avoid conflict or challenge. But when one is committed to growing with another, every disagreement, every moment of misunderstanding becomes a mirror. It shows where patience is lacking, where pride still controls, and where compassion has not yet been cultivated. In this way, growth together accelerates personal growth. You learn that harmony is not the absence of difference, but the ability to move fluidly within difference. It is the art of staying rooted even when the winds of emotion and opinion try to pull you away. To commit to growth together is to understand that time is not only your own. You no longer measure progress solely by how far you have come, but also by how deeply you have supported the unfolding of the other. There will be seasons where your growth feels stagnant, where the soil seems too dry and your branches heavy. In those times, it is the presence of the other that brings nourishment, that gives reminder and strength. Then there will be seasons where you are the one offering shade, stability, and reassurance. Growth together is not a constant balance, but a flowing exchange of giving and receiving, of supporting and being supported, of teaching and being taught. This commitment requires responsibility. To grow together does not mean to hold the other captive in your vision of who they should be. It does not mean to shape them into your expectations or to bind them to your desires. It means to create an environment where they can expand naturally, even when their direction surprises you, even when their growth challenges your own comfort. Commitment in this sense is not a chain, but a soil rich enough for both to take root. It asks for trust that the freedom of the other will not threaten the bond, but instead deepen it. When two people commit to growth together, they create a rhythm that is stronger than isolation. Each step forward taken by one becomes encouragement for the other. Each obstacle overcome together becomes a memory that strengthens the foundation. Growth together becomes not only about the individuals, but about the energy they create between them. This energy is not static. It evolves, adapts, and transforms, becoming something neither could generate alone. It is the invisible force that allows both to withstand the storms and still rise with resilience. In the journey of growth together, silence and listening become as important as speaking. Often the greatest gift is not in offering advice or direction, but in holding a space where the other feels safe enough to unravel. It is in that silence that seeds of new understanding are planted. Commitment is shown not by loud declarations, but by consistent presence, by the willingness to stay even when it is uncomfortable, and by the patience to wait when the other needs time to unfold. True growth together cannot be rushed. Just as a tree cannot be forced to grow faster by pulling at its branches, neither can transformation be hurried. It requires time, seasons of rest and seasons of blooming, cycles of loss and renewal. Commitment is the quiet reminder that no matter how long the process takes, the journey is still being walked together. It is the refusal to abandon the soil when the harvest has not yet come, and the trust that what is nurtured with care will eventually bear fruit. The beauty of growing together is that it creates resilience. Alone, one can falter, lose direction, or give up when difficulties seem overwhelming. But when two are bound by the shared commitment to growth, there exists a strength that multiplies. One may stumble, but the other steadies. One may doubt, but the other believes. In this way, growth together creates a safety net that makes risks less frightening, changes less intimidating, and challenges less defeating. The presence of another who is equally committed transforms struggle into opportunity and setbacks into lessons that do not need to be faced alone. Commitment to growth together is not only about endurance, but also about expansion. It is about daring to dream beyond personal ambitions and recognizing that growth can ripple outward when nurtured collectively. The energy of two evolving together does not remain confined. It influences others, inspires communities, and becomes an example of what is possible when commitment is not self-centered but shared. It is a reminder that transformation multiplies when it is rooted in connection, that strength expands when it is carried by more than one, and that the path of growth is not limited to the self but can become a shared unfolding that touches every aspect of life.